On January 20th, 2017, I sat about 30 feet from Donald Trump as he became the 45th president of the United States. I was there covering the event with PBS News. I was working with a team of journalism students from Ithaca College. The next day, we all went to the National Mall as thousands and thousands of Americans descended on D.C. for the Women's March. As I talked with and interviewed people and had conversations with people at both these events, I soon found a nation divided. Now, you don't need me to get up here and tell you that our nation feels divided. You can see that. You can turn on the news, especially cable news, go read a newspaper, open up Twitter and Facebook, and you'll see that we feel divided. We feel torn. Our political conversations feel so vicious. Our political affiliations so tribalistic. And now, of course, I wish I could get up here and tell you I have some grand solution to solve all these problems. I don't. I don't think anyone does. If they do, they should let us know soon. But what I can do is I can focus on an area that I think we've neglected for far too long, and that's our social fabric as a nation. Now, you can think of social fabric as the glue that holds society together, the bonds and relationships we have with one another. I like to think of social fabric as the fabric of a blanket. When I was younger, my grandmother would crochet blankets for all of my cousins and myself. We would get to pick the color and everything like that. And I was always so fascinated by how each individual piece of yarn was intertwined with all the others to form this beautiful design and pattern. Each of us is like one of those pieces of yarn. We have connections and relationships with others, and we come together to form our social fabric as a nation. Now, just like a piece of yarn, just like a blanket can wear down and tear over time, so too can our social fabric. Those bonds don't just happen. They rely on things. They rely on trust. They rely on expectations of each other. They rely on shared values and goals. And unfortunately, our social fabric as a nation has started to wear down over time. In terms of trust, which is one of those building blocks for a social fabric, trust levels in America have gone down dramatically. What if I asked you, what do you think cockroaches, the band Nickelback, and traffic jams all have in common? Well, in 2013, Americans said they preferred all of those things over Congress. Pretty sad. Don't worry, Congress is at least more popular than playground bullies, so they have that going for them. But if you look at the numbers, trust levels have gone down dramatically. In 1958, when Americans were asked whether they could trust the government to do the right thing most of the time or all the time, nearly 2/3 of Americans said yes. That number today is around 20% of Americans who feel that way. And it's not just the government that people have lost trust in. They've lost trust in other large institutions, such as the press, the media. But most concerning to me is that we've lost trust in each other. What if I asked you this question? Do you trust most people? Do you trust most people in this room? If you're like most Americans, you'd actually probably say no to that question. Only 1/3 of Americans say they can trust most people. That's dangerous. Back in the 1970s, that number was around 50% of Americans who said so, that they could trust most people. Trust is a necessary building block for any society to function properly. And we need to pay better attention to this. While a lot of attention is being paid to our big political debates at the institutional layer of Congress, the presidency, or at the individual layer of how certain policies affect each of us individually, not as much attention is being paid to all those layers in between, the middle layers of our society, families, civic associations, neighborhoods, communities, religious institutions. We've neglected to pay attention to these middle layers, and at our own detriment. In terms of neighborhoods, neighbors are spending less time with each other. Only 19% of Americans say they spend a social evening with one of their neighbors each week. In terms of civic engagement, we're not doing any better. Out of the entire population that's of voting age and eligible to vote, only 65% of Americans are actually registered to vote. And when it comes to actually voting, even less do so, especially if it's not a presidential election year. And when it comes to paying attention to public affairs, only 26% of Americans say they pay attention to public affairs. These numbers scare me, and they scare social scientists and political scientists as well. There's many scholars looking into this. Robert Putnam is probably the most well-known. But long before any of us, any current political researchers started paying attention to this topic, there was a man by the name of Alexis de Tocqueville. He was a French gentleman. He came over to America to study our ways and our customs. And what he found and what fascinated him was how Americans were so inclined to form voluntary associations and groups with each other. And he was so fascinated by it that he wrote a book about it called Democracy in America. I recommend it. One of my favorites. I'm kind of weird. But anyway, de Tocqueville was so fascinated by how Americans would form these voluntary associations with each other that he wrote this book. And he said that these associations gave us our strength and character. It can be hard to see what de Tocqueville was talking about today. In a time of such division, we feel like we're torn apart. We're torn apart as a society. So how do we get back to that? Well, here's a start. First, we need to focus on local government. Americans need to realize that not every decision is being made at the congressional level. Many decisions are being made right down the street from you, at city and town halls. We need to show up and make sure our voices are being heard, especially young people. When I was in high school, I used to go to school board meetings just for fun. Again, I'm pretty weird. And I would show up to these meetings. I'd be the youngest person by several decades. I still do this. I still go to League of Women Voters events here in Ithaca. Now I usually go and cover them as a journalist. And I'm always the youngest person at these events. We need more young people going to these things, making our voices heard, not just for issues that will affect us down the road, but that are happening right now and affecting us right now. Get involved in your local government. Run for office if you feel so inclined. Let's get more young people in office. In terms of local government, you can actually have a real, tangible impact by showing up to these meetings. Number two, we need to volunteer our time and our resources. Now, volunteering is actually a bright spot in American society. Nearly a quarter of Americans said they volunteered their time in 2015. That's pretty good, but we can always do better. Find an issue that you're passionate about. Give back your time and resources. You don't need to be wealthy to volunteer, to make a difference. Find a Saturday afternoon that you can spare. Go and find an issue you're passionate about. One of my favorite things about volunteering is that you often find people who care about the same issues as you, and you may not have met them otherwise unless you started volunteering. So go and find the issues you're passionate about, give back your time, and you can truly make a difference. And the third point I want to make, engage with people you disagree with. Let's have civil discussions about ideas we disagree with. Criticize ideas and not people. Have open and honest conversations. Read books that challenge you. Read political commentaries and columns that challenge you. Have discussions with people who voted differently than you in the last election. We can learn a whole lot about people by just sitting down and talking with them. I know it can be scary to talk with someone who has a worldview so different than your own. But if we're going to solve any of these problems in our nation, it has to start by just talking with each other. And I guarantee you, you can find something in common with someone, even if they have a completely different worldview than you. You can find something in common with them. And I challenge you to do that. So going forward, rebuilding our social fabric is going to be tough. But I want you to imagine with me a world where we didn't just debate and argue using sound bites we heard on cable news and didn't just yell at each other, but actually had real policy discussions about how issues affect us, real policy discussions. A world where we didn't just go on to Facebook and have comment wars with each other, but actually talked about issues with each other. A world where we gave back our time and helped our neighbors instead of just being focused on our own lives. We can do this. It's going to be tough, trust me. It's going to be really tough. But I believe in each of you, and I believe that each of us can make a real difference in the world. We're doing it right now. Each of us on stage is sharing an idea with you, the audience. You'll get to think about these ideas, analyze them in your head, debate them. Afterwards, you can come and talk with us and debate us if you so choose. We're open to that. This is the start of a conversation. We need to have more of these. So going forward, I truly believe we can repair our social fabric. It will be tough. But again, each of us is like one of those individual pieces of yarn, and we're interwoven into society. We need to make sure we're doing our part to repair the social fabric. It starts with each and every single one of us. So let's go get started. Thank you.